Notice also verses 6 as we go through this. Notice also verses 6 through 8. So they say, sure, we'll accept your hospitality. Invitation is offered, invitation is accepted. And in verse 6, Abraham hurried into the tent to Sarah and said, quickly make ready 3 measures of fine meal, knead it, and make cakes. By the way, ladies, how would you respond to that? Stop what you're doing. I need you to make 3 cakes right now. Okay. Abraham ran to the herd, took a tender and good calf. There wasn't a local restaurant to go visit. If you were going to show hospitality in these times, it was going to take a little time. You're going to have to pound out the food. You're going to have to take time to cook it. You're going to have to actually kill the animal, and you're going to have to butcher it, and then you're going to have to cook it. That was going to take a process of several hours. There's a lot of work, by the way, in hospitality. Thank the people who are hospitable to you, because there's a lot of preparation involved in that. And there's a lot of love where there's a lot of preparation and service. But Abraham ran, took a tender and good calf, gave it to a young man. He hastened to prepare it. He took butter and milk and the calf which he had prepared, and he set it before them, and he stood by them under the tree as they ate. Hospitality is yielding. Yes, it takes time. And yes, you will have to stop something that you have in your schedule to make time for it. I don't know what Sarah was doing when this all happened. She may have been doing laundry. The servant may have been feeding the herd, but they all have to stop what they're doing to entertain this guest. And sometimes we've just got to put the mop bucket down and save it for tomorrow. Did you notice that Abraham is standing in verse 8? If there's not enough chairs, you're not the one that sits down and lets your guest stand. You let your guest sit down, and you stand if that's what's necessary while they eat. Can we apply this situation to when a guest comes to our assembly? Have you ever seen this happen in a church? Someone is sitting in a seat, they're a guest, they don't know where everybody sits, right? And they sit down and someone walks up and says, "You're in my seat." Don't do that. Go find somewhere else to sit yourself. That's rude. Abraham says, "You sit down, I'm going to stand up." That's an act of courtesy, of hospitality. Notice also, we keep going through the text. Notice here, verse 9. Then they said to him, "Where is Sarah, your wife?" Now they're getting to the point of their visit. It's not just so they could get a free meal. They had something that they wanted to share that was important. It says, "Where is Sarah, your wife?" And he said, "Here in the tent." And he said, "I will certainly return to you according to the time of life. And behold, Sarah, your wife, shall have a son." They'd already been promised that through their seed, all nations would be blessed. They'd already been told that Ishmael wasn't the promised seed in Genesis 17. There would be a different son that would be the daughter of Abraham and Sarah. And here the angels are coming and they say Sarah is going to have a son. Sarah was listening in the tent door which was behind him. And Abraham and Sarah were old. They were well advanced in age. Sarah had passed the age of childbearing. And so Sarah laughed. These crazy guests, they think I'm going to have a baby. And she said, "After I have grown old, shall I have pleasure, my Lord being old also?" And the Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh? Saying, shall I surely bear a child since I am old?" And there's a great question here in verse 14. Is anything too hard for the Lord? Is anything too hard for the Lord? When you get yourself in a difficult situation sometime and you think there's just no way that you're ever going to be able to get out of it or fix it, you think about that question. Is anything too hard for the Lord? The Lord can help you through those difficult situations. And it says, "At the appointed time, I will return to you according to the time of life, and Sarah shall have a son." So notice what's involved also in the hospitality of Abraham and his guests. Well, they're conversing. They're having a conversation. They don't just give these guys a room and a key and go back to work or go back to doing their business. They are spending time together, talking and having conversations. I remember a preacher mentioning this. He said, "I went and stayed at a young couple's home one time, and it's a beautiful home, it's a beautiful place." He said, "But every night after we get back from the gospel meeting, I would sit down and there'd be the husband with his iPad in his hand and the wife with her phone in her hand, and they were just on their phones, and I just kind of sat there like, Hey, I'm here. He said, a lot of times I just go to bed. Obviously, it's like I didn't exist. Converse with the people who are in your home. Talk to them. And when you converse, good things can happen. Notice the good news that gets shared in his home. You're going to have a baby. There's some good news there. And that baby is going to be the one through whom the Christ is born. Good news can be shared and good things can happen. One last thing about their hospitality before we jump into chapter 19, and 19 is quicker than 18. But in verse 16, the men rose from there, looked towards Sodom, and Abraham went with them to send them on the way. I just want you to notice that hospitality is also finishing. What do I mean by that? You know, when I was a kid, something I always remember my parents doing when we would leave the church building, for example, is if you were one of the last people to leave, and there was another family that was with you that was getting in their car, you always waited till they started their car, and you knew their car was running before you left. It was just a nice thing to do, making sure that they get out of the building safely, because sometimes your car's dead, something's not working, you realize your tire's flat. They're just finishing. One thing I remember my grandparents doing every time we ever walked out of their house is they walked us out of their house all the way to their driveway. Didn't matter if it was hot or cold or raining or snowing. And they stood there until we left, and they just stood there and waved. And I always remember Grandma and Grandpa doing that. I asked my grandma after my grandpa passed away, and now they've both passed away now, but I asked my grandma, I said, why did you guys always do that? I just kind of always wondered about that. And she said, well, your grandpa got that from Genesis 18 and verse 16. That's what Abraham and Sarah did when their guests leave. They took them out on the way, and he just always felt like that's what he should do. And so now I try to do that when people leave my home, just because I remember that. But it's finishing. It's finishing. Make sure you not just welcome people, but say goodbye to people when they leave. Let them know it was good having them.